Eric Asimov is the acclaimed chief wine critic for the New York Times. He writes the immensely popular columns The Pour, Wines of the Times, and Wine School, where he focuses on one specific type of wine each month. His down-to-earth, no snobby, unpretentious writing has made him America's most trusted wine critic. His latest book, How to Love Wine, is a witty and charming combination memoir and manifesto. He shares how he went from writing beer reviews for his high school newspaper to the most coveted job in the industry. I'm particularly thrilled that Eric is here today to chat with us about his love of Italian wine. Eric, it's such a pleasure to have you here so we could chat about your love of Italian wine.
It's my pleasure, anytime.
So tell me a little of how you feel about Italian wine.
Well, the great thing for me is the variety of it. You have to go back hundreds of years when every region had their own wine. You made one wine in the valley over the hill, in the next valley they made a completely different wine. And 25 years ago, Americans were familiar with maybe a handful of these wines, but there are dozens, if not hundreds, and now we're discovering them and experiencing how wonderful they are. They're showing up everywhere. They're great.
I love your wine school. Every month it's such a delight, and you've done Italian wine and you're going to do some more.
Absolutely.
How do you pick? How does that work?
Well, this is a kind of a school in fundamentals, and in some ways a number of Italian wines are kind of advanced courses. So we're now moving on. We're going to be doing Nebbiolo wines from Barolo, Barbaresco, and Piemonte. We'll be doing wines from Mount Etna. We'll be looking at some Italian whites. People have an outdated view of Italian whites, but they can be so wonderful. And we may even do something like Lambrusco, which is just a joy.
Explain a little for the audience who may not know about how the New York Times Wine School works.
Well, this is it's a once a month column, and I pick a particular wine and suggest a few bottles that readers can look for. And over the course of the month, we drink these wines virtually together. And so readers can comment on them. We can have sort of a conversation through comments on the Times website. And the idea here is not to taste wines, as if it's some sort of laboratory experiment, but to actually drink them in a natural setting. Drink them with food, with friends or family, and sort of pay attention to the wine. It's not about reading books or memorizing anything. It's just about paying attention to your own experience, really, and taking your own experience seriously rather than feeling that you don't know enough to enjoy wine.
What about wine pairing with Italian food? Have you had some nice combinations that you particularly remember?
Well, there's all kinds of classic combinations, but I personally think that the notion of wine pairing is a little bit overrated. We tend to make it too complicated, balancing nuances here and hints of flavor there, and maybe that's for sommeliers and chefs to do so they can offer you a precise experience. I think at home, there's a dozen different wines you could drink with carbonara, for example. And who's to say whether white wine is better with carbonara than red wine? I've had both and I love them both.
How about ordinary pizza, a good pizza?
Well, in Italy, people tend to drink beer with pizza. And I believe the bubble theory. I love Lambrusco.
I loved in How to Love Wine. Your description of a friend of yours, Jim, and his dad, and how he enjoyed wine. Can you share a little of that story?
Well, Jim's father was an immigrant from Sicily, and he was not a connoisseur of wine, but he always had a gallon jug of red wine in his refrigerator, and when he came home from work every day, he would pour himself a glass or two with dinner. And to me, that is the most basic and wonderful way to enjoy wine. You see it as a food with your meal, with your family. You don't really care where it came from, what kind of wine it is. I mean, in a lot of ways, we're beyond that now. We can't help but be very conscious of these things, especially when we live in a place like New York, where we have so much choice, wines from around the world. But for centuries, you just drank what was available locally, and you didn't have a lot of choice, and that was fine. That was the wine that people drank.
I love how you talk about sparkling wine and the Italian celebration with it.
Well, I have been to a lot of dinners in Italy, and maybe they're a little bit ceremonial because they're with winemakers or people in the business, and I've never once seen a meal start off without spumante of some sort. Whether it's Prosecco or Franciacorta or sparkling wine from Mount Etna, it's always begins the meal. And it's not that everybody drinks a bottle of it, but they will touch bubbles to their lips before moving on to the in their minds more important red wines or whatever is being served.
Well, chin chin, a toast to Italian wines.
Chin chin.
And thank you so much.
My pleasure.